Okay, we're in Chafan Alf, Halachit Alf. We really started Halacha last week, and we're going to finish this week. Okay. Halachit Alf is about a machvas, and this week we're going to explain what it is. But before we do, I have to tell you just as an unusual question about the girsa in this, how to read this thing. Okay, not how to read the words, but where the girsa is in this thing, and it's with a somewhat of an afkamina. Okay. And then the difference is between the printed Shulchan Aruch like this, that'd be traditional printed Shulchan Aruch, versus the way the Mishnah Berurah has it, the way he prints Shulchan Aruch, and the Mishnah Berurah's way is the way the new Shulchan Aruchs are printed also. Okay, and it goes like this. If you read it in the old Shulchan Aruch, I'll read this inside here. You listen to what it says. Machvas shemetagnim ba, a machvas that you fry it, muteres b'hagol, you're allowed to do hag'alah to it. Then he arucha mesim chetzia v'hoifich oidu mesim the other chetzia. If it's too big to get into the pot at once, you do one side and then you do the other side. He arucha b'yoser malabne be'emtza. If it's so big that you can't even get it in by doing one side at a time, and you got to get the middle, so you could do libun to the middle. V'yesh machmirun malabne hamachas. And some hold that you should be machmir and do libun to a machas. That's what we talked about last week. It's a machos Rishonim. So the mechaber says you should do hag'alah. Then he sticks in a middle din about what you do if it's a very big pot, and he says v'yesh armin that you should do libun to the machas. So the mechaber is bringing 2 days. First he's saying that you do hag'alah, then he's saying that yesh armin that you should do libun. Then the Ramah says u'belibun kol duhu shekashrus lo v'bechot sagila. It's enough to do libun kal, since it's only chum you should do libun kal. V'noigin labne l'chatchila, and the minig is to be machmer for the shita and to do libun. But the Eved, if you can't do Libun, you could be Semach on hag'alah, because most Rishonim, that's the Ikra, then you could do hag'alah. Okay? That's what it says here in Shulchan Aruch. The Mechaber said, there's 2 days, either hag'alah or Libun, and the Ramah says, and the Lachatchil you're supposed to do Libun.
Well, maybe the one on the first, on the Reisha.
Which is what?
The Libun Kaldu Sagila is going on the Reisha, in other words, since you have hag'alah, so then the middle part, you don't have to do Libun Gomer.
Okay, but
it's really hag'alah, so you can cash.
He's going on the thing. If the thing is really big,
right,
then you can do libun kal. Okay, the way it says it.
Well, it going to make sense. Well, since hag'alah is enough, so the libun kal is enough.
Okay, that you're saying that's I'm getting to a point about that. But the way we read it, the way it's read over here, it doesn't say that. It says a person is supposed to do libun. And you can get away with libun kal. You can get away with libun kal because since the libun is only a chumrah, you can do libun kal instead of the libun. That's what he's going on.
He's certainly going on both.
You don't read it in here. I'm not reading. I'm reading what the mechaber says it in this Shulchan Aruch. The mechaber says do hag'alah. Yeah. Some people say you should do libun. There's like a side point here. What to do?
Read the Ramah again.
The mechaber says v'yesh machmirim l'laben hamachvas.
Yeah.
And the Ramah says u'belibun kol duhu shekashrus lo mibechut sagila.
What kind of chumrah is that? It's the same thing.
No.
If libun kal,
the mechaber says you should do libun.
Libun gomer.
Right. And the Ramah says no, you can do libun kal.
It's very different than this.
I'm getting. That's exactly what I'm telling you. But the mechaber says you should do libun.
Yeah.
And the Ramah says but you can do libun kal. Because
and
then he says the noigin l'labne l'chatchila. L'chatchila you should try to do this type of libun. But if you can't do it, then you can get away with the Ramah.
Is better than hag'alah.
But
that's what I'm saying, the way you read.
Yes, of course it is. Because we saw earlier that there's some Rishonim, Haggai holds that Libun Gal is Libun. He holds that it really is Libun. So that's why you could do it, you can get away with that. Okay, now, look at the way the Mishnah Berurah brings it, which is where the new Shulchan Aruch have it. The Mechaber says, Machos shemetagnin, ba muteres b'hag'alah. You could do hag'alah. V'imhi arucha mesim chetzia v'hoifichoid mesim chetzia acher. If it's too big, you do one half at a time. V'imhi arucha b'yosem labne b'emtza, then you do Libun in the middle. So if it's too big, and you can't get the 2 sides into the pot. And you do one side of the pot, and the other side you won't get the middle. You can do libun to the middle of the pot. Okay, that's the end of the mechaber according to this way. That's the end. The mechaber never says that you should be machmir to do libun. Okay, according to the way we have it in the Mishnah Berurah and the new Shulchan Aruch, the mechaber never brings the other day that you should do libun. It's not here. Okay, and the mechaber, the last thing the mechaber says was if it's a really big pot, you do libun to the middle, and on that. The Ramah says, "Ubelibun kol du shekashrus lo sagila." It's enough to do libun kal in the middle. So first of all, the way we have it in the Mishnah Berurah, in his Shulchan Aruch, the mechaber never says to be machmer for the other day to do libun kal. That's one thing. And second is the Ramah who says you can do libun kal is talking about the middle of the pot rather than talking about the whole pot. Okay, and then it's talking about what you said, David, that he's talking about doing how you do the middle of the pot. And the Ramah is saying that when you need to do hag'alah, you could get away with doing Libun Kal instead of hag'alah.
Okay.
Okay? What I'm saying is like this. Aside from this one thing, the way we have the Shulchan Aruch printed here, it doesn't say any place in the Shulchan Aruch. Of course it's true, but it doesn't say any place in Tafnan Aleph or Tafnan Beis that I know of that you could get away, you could do Libun Kal instead of hag'alah. Okay? Of course it's true, you're allowed to. I'm just saying it's odd that it doesn't, unless you have this girsa, it doesn't say any place in here that Libun Kal can take the place of hag'alah. It does say in Hilchos Yontif. We won't talk to us. In Hilchos Yontif it says that on Yontif you're not allowed to kasher things because it's near Kimisakin. But if you're heating up the pot anyhow and you're doing a Libun Kal, so that's okay because it doesn't look like you're doing anything special. You're just heating up the pot. You're preheating the pot. So that's good enough and that's okay and it covers for hag'alah. I'm saying there's like a remez to it over there. But besides the way this, according to the gears that we have, the way it says it now, the way the Mishabur brings it, the Ramah is saying that Libun Kal could take the place of hag'alah, which is of course true, but according to the way the old Shulchan Aruch says it, it doesn't say that then. It says a completely different thing. The Mechaber says, first of all, brings the Machmirim that say you should do Libun, which according to this way doesn't say it, and the Ramah is saying that you should know that this Libun could be done with Libun Kal. I hope I'm being clear. Okay, that's just it's just odd, just the way it's split. It's literally where the words are placed over here. According to the Mishabur brings, the V'yesh Machmir Laban HaMachlas is the Ramah's words, not the Mechaber's words. Okay, and there's actually a Magen Avraham partially about what the gears in this also. Okay, now back to the Machlas itself. I mentioned last week that in Yeridea there's a siman about hag'alah's kelim, not just in Aruch, but the siman in Yeridea is very small because one of the halachas in that siman says if you want to know the halachas about hag'alah's kelim, go look in Aruch. So the things that are in Yeridea is only when there's a difference between Pesach and otherwise, that's when there's halachas in Yeridea. Okay, so one of the halachas in that siman is a machlas needs libun. In Ardin it says a machlas you could do hag'alah, but yesh machmirim to do libun, and if you're stuck you can get away with hag'alah also. But in Yeridea it says machlas needs libun. Doesn't bring 2 days. Doesn't bring that you could be making a
Chaver says it?
Machaber, that's it. There's just one day, there's only one wording, it says machlas needs libun. That's it. It's a machlokes rishonim. I'll recap last week because we're going to need it for a second. A machlas is a pot that you cook things in oil, okay? Some kind of a frying utensil. We'll talk about what it is exactly in a second. And so people said you need libun because the pot, sometimes the oil burns out and the stuff is cooking right on the walls of the pot. And others said no, there's always oil left in the center of the pot anyhow, so it's considered a liquid being cooked in here, and you could do hag'alah. So for Pesach, we say min hadin you could do hag'alah, and it's a chumrah. If you can, you're supposed to do libun or libun kal. For year round, the Mechaber says no, you have to do libun gomer for all the times. So you have to do libun. So what's the reason why we're being more maker for Pesach? Why would you think? Usually, you think we'd be more machmir for Pesach than being maker for Pesach. We're being more maker. So the reason is, I think it's the Gra says it. Maybe others say it also. The reason we're more maker is because Pesach has there's one angle that Pesach has a kula. Heter bala. There are some Rishonim who hold that chametz is heter bala. If you hold that chametz is heter bala, then you don't need to ever do libun. You don't ever need to, and even bleed straight on the fire, you wouldn't have to do libun. So since there are those who hold that we're matar that shita to say here there's a shiloh that you need to do libun or hag'alah, so we could say that you could be samach on that shita and say that you don't have to do libun. Okay, that's how he says. Okay. Now I'm gonna, before we go to talk about it, it's worth mentioning that we're about to talk about what this machlas is, and the Mechaber says that for year-round use you for sure need to do libun. Ramosha says without explaining why. Ramosha has a tshuva about this in Chelik Gimel Siman Yudal. It's the second part of that tshuva. He says in his tshuva that Mechaber that says you should be machmer for year round. If you kasher when it's any ben yomer, you don't have to be machmer for it. You don't have to be machmer for it. He doesn't say why. Maybe he says it's the minute like that, or he just says something. If you kasher when it's any ben yomer, don't worry about it. You could just kasher desert.
Hag'alah.
Do hag'alah. You don't have to do libun. It is a machlokes rishonim. It's not like he's coming from no place. It is a machlokes rishonim. In Aruch we say we're mako, and you say at least minadin you can do hag'alah. You're supposed to if you can't do libun. But in your day it's like very straightforward. It just says you have to do libun. So it's a very
every hag'alah is supposed to be done in Ben Yemen.
I don't know. I'm thinking.
If the Machabris is Libun and not hag'alah, that means even hag'alah is Ben Yemen.
Yes, and it's strange because when you want to say something like that, you would think that there would be more explanation to it. Or say, we always did like that. You think there'd be more hesber to what's going on over here. But I have to tell you something. Once we talk about what this machlas is, you might not so much disagree with him. Okay, so let's just hold on to that for a second.
Right,
No. But I'm not, okay, we'll talk. Let's go. So what is this machlas that we're talking about? That if you remember, I said the shaila in the rush. What about this? The machlas is talking about you put oil in, and sometimes the food burns.
Cast iron.
Sometimes it burns. I'm not sure what it is because listen, what happens? And he says, and there's liquid left in the center of it, even though there's no oil on the edges. He says, yeah, it burns sometimes, but there's still water in the middle, liquid in the middle, and therefore it's considered to be cooked with water. Now, to me, that doesn't sound like a frying pan. It sounds like a deep fryer. It sounds like you're doing with a lot of oil. Something like
a Chinese.
Well, a wok doesn't use oil or minimal oil.
It's that style.
We'll get into it. Well, a wok is. Can I you have to hold that for a second? In a deep fryer, you have so much oil that you could say if you got burnt onto the edges, there would be liquid in the middle. But if you do like if you make pancakes in a frying pan. So what does that mean? If it got burnt on, what do you want oil left in the middle? It doesn't make sense. The oil is only on the edges. Okay, the way we think of frying. So the whole discussion sounds like it's talking about a case where there's a lot of oil in the pot. Okay, that's what sounds like the case is going to be. And on that here we're saying to be to do libun and there to always do libun. And the Mishnah Berurah sort of says this. Okay, now here's what the shaila is going to be. The Mishnah Berurah says this whole thing about a machlas is only talking about that you use a lot of oil. He doesn't say how much. He doesn't say what he means. A lot of oil. But if you just grease the pan. You put a little oil so that it shouldn't burn. That kind of a pan, that of course it needs libun. That's not what the shaila is. Yeah, it's right here. He says if it has just a drop of oil on the thing, that just to keep it from burning, that we're not even talking about that case. Of course that needs libun. Okay. Now the question is: so we have one case where you're greasing the pan, and one case we're using a lot of oil, and the shaila is what the line is. What's the difference? When do you cross the line from being just a tiny little bit of oil to grease the pan, and a lot? That the din is talking about, okay? And as you might have guessed, there's two different ways of looking at this thing. There's two completely different ways of looking at this thing. To me, the rush, which is really where the din is coming from, sounds like he's talking that there's a lot of oil. But if I make, like in case if a person makes pancakes in their house, okay, what do? You put in a certain amount of oil, but not this tremendous amount. That would sound like it's going in the Mishnah Berurah's case. And just for your curiosity, for the curious. I can't even pronounce this word. At the last of the skinny lines of my Mishnah Berurah, it says, the chen ha skvaver others, something like that. And Rabbi Schwartz, when I once passed this in with him, he says, a frying pan. Of course, that's what it means. But to me, I have no idea what that is. But anyway, that's what he says. He says, it means a frying pan, and that it use it with a certain amount of oil. I don't know how much oil you put into a frying pan, a certain amount of oil. So Rabbi Schwartz thought that Rabbi Schwartz's feeling was that the only time that you need libun, the only time, the Mishnah Berurah's case that when you have a tiny bit, it's mamash like you put Pam on it. You put mamash like a tiny amount. Or people used to put a piece of butter. You rub some butter on the bottom of it and put the food in. That's the little oil that doesn't need libun. But any, if you put pancakes, you pour in some oil into the pan, that's already the case of the machlas. That's how he understands it, which is a tremendous kula. A guy goes into his house and he makes, puts broil something on a pan. He does something in it. No, but I'm trying to think of some milk. He makes an egg. Okay. He fries an egg with cheese in it in a flake sugar pan. He would say to him, then you could do libun. You could do. He would say let me tell you what he would say. That is not the thing, Rabbi Schwartz. That is not the thing that has just a tiny bit that for sure needs libun. Okay, but now I want to end. What is the end of that sentence? Okay, what's the end of that sentence? And he would say, and therefore, anyway, if it has the more amount of oil, it needs hag'alah. Okay, wait. Now let's hold on a second. In your day, that's not what it says. In your day, it says the machlas. You're trying to say this qualifies as the machlas. What does it say? It says it needs libun. It doesn't need hag'alah. It's only in Pesach that we say if you're stuck, you could be samach on hag'alah. So I'm saying this to you. I'm not asking it as a question. I'm saying to you as a raya. Where Moshe said, when you do it Eina Ben Yoma, even though the Mechaber says to do Libun, now you can really do hag'alah. As we see all these people who are talking about it, you're going to see every case that you're going to say, oh, that's the case with a lot of oil. Well, what's the din in that case? What do you do with the case that has a lot of oil? I told you a deep fryer maybe means a machlas. Well, how would you kasher a deep fryer? You kasher a deep fryer, you do hag'alah to it. What are you talking about? The Mechaber says in your day, on a machlas you have to do Libun Gomer. So you're going to keep you're going to realize that what Rav Moshe said was not so far-fetched. Rav Moshe was really like sort of reporting the minhag, because Lamaisa that's I think really what people do. Every one of these cases you'll hear, if you agree that there's considered a lot of oil, you say, okay, good, then you do hag'alah. Now, milchig, I'm sorry, you're right, I forgot to mention it. Yes, milchig is different. Milchig is different because for sure, if something is milchig, we've talked about it. If something is just milchig or just fleshig, that's a terrible, and you for sure could do hag'alah. You don't need to do libun. We had this. It happened just this week. A frying pan, a pan that was used for milk, and when it was Eina Ben Yoma, it was used for meat, to be kasher with hag'alah, because it's a terrible. You don't have to do libun. If it was Eina Ben Yoma,
it means it's also called a terabana, even though the rabbanan we don't give it a terabana. Even it's also
meat. The meat itself.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
It was also to put the meat in there.
Right, it was also, so that's an issue on you, Rav Moshe. It's on you to use the pot. But the food, it doesn't make possible chol. It doesn't make possible chol. Right, the food doesn't become usher at all, right? It's like the food stays mutter. Okay, so that's that case is, but if it would be real issue, you'd come and say it by mistake.
The pot can be used for pirate, right? Such a pot can
din
can use for pirate.
Not anymore.
No, because now
at this point, right now it's also for both.
Because it's a milk pot, and a fleshig pot.
It's Eina Ben Yoma both.
I'm right.
So it says you're not allowed to use it for Paris. That's what it says there. It says you're not allowed to use it for Paris. You're not allowed to use it for anything because it's a milchig pot and a fleshig pot. So you're not allowed to use it now for anything because it's too easy to get confused.
It's not easy to get confused. I mean, I think you should help use it.
Oh, the ikar hatin? You wait to be it's an Eina Ben Yoma. Yeah, you could if you want to cook potatoes. Yes, ikar hatin, but that's not. You're not allowed to. So that's okay. So what is? I told you, Rabbi. I would think that my response from the Rosh. I'll tell you a few.
You're just mentioning the Rosh now. You didn't give us a background.
I did. Well, I did last week. This din. I'll say it again. This din of a machlas comes from a Rosh, who says there were those who said you need libun because sometimes it burns onto the wall, and the Rosh and the Rosh says they're wrong. He proves that they're wrong, but he says what? Why are they wrong? Why don't we worry that it sometimes burns onto the wall? So he said that's because even when it burns onto the wall, there's still plenty of liquid in the middle of the pot, and therefore it's considered to be cooking in liquid. That's what this din. So the 2 days are in this rush. The case that we're talking about, this is not being printed in a newspaper. This is coming right out of this rush. That's what the halacha yirav is coming out of the rush. So if you want to know what case we're talking about, to figure out what case we're not talking about, then we look over there. That's okay. Now, the Pri Megadim brings from Rashba. Pri Megadim on this thing brings from Rashba in Tersavais that he says when you have a spit that you cook on, he says there also people put a little bit of oil onto it. When you make their barbecues, they put a little oil onto it. He says that doesn't count. That's what Mr. Bruce saying. That little bit of oil, that doesn't count. He says, but if you have a pan, I'm going to see if I remember the words of here. Okay. If you even use a little bit of oil in a pan, he talks about whether you need libun, and he talks about whether we're concerned that it's going to get burned up, or he's not concerned that it's going to get burned up. Okay, I don't want to focus on that part, but his distinction is between a little bit like on a spit. You put a little bit shmir onto a spit, or you put a little bit more oil when you do it into a pan. Okay, and that's his difference between being for sure libun and the shaila of machlas. Okay, that sounds not like Rabbi Schwartz. Again, it sounds like the way I thought the Rosh was saying, which is if it's the difference is whether there's oil like for a pancake or oil like putting on Pam. Rabbi Schwartz says when the Mishnah Berurah, I'm not being clear. The Mishnah Berurah says there's a case where you put on so little oil that in that case it's for sure needs libun. That's not even the shaila. Okay, what case is that? Rabbi Schwartz says that case that you put on Pam. Okay, that case is that you put on Pam. If you put on even a little bit of oil, then it's a machlas. Okay? So I'm sorry. The Rashba is saying, like Rabbi Schwartz is saying. The Rashba is saying is that if you put on, that sounds strange. The Rashba is saying if you put on even a little bit of oil, it's only the pan that makes it be for sure libun. If you put on a little bit of oil, then we're into halacha yirav. Okay? And the Rosh, I was not so convinced it's like that. And I'll tell you one last thing, which is to the Shulchan about this. You'll tell me what to do with this. The Nevi'im will tell me. There's two of them. First, in Halacha Yud Gimel, he says, if you have a shvud, a spit, then you need to do libun. He says you have this spit that you cook on it. Ve'ein b'neihem shum mashke toifeach sheyoylach kama chametz esach asur v'asla. You have no mashke, which is toifeach, which usually means enough that you could touch it. That makes it's not just moisture. It's enough to translate toifeach hamnas latech. It's enough to translate to something else. Then you need to do libun because there's no liquid in the middle there to make any in between. Okay, so the word toifeach makes it sound like if you have even a small amount of oil in there, that would stop it from reading libun. Okay? The only problem is that the word tefech is in parentheses. Okay? I don't know what you're supposed to do with that. I don't know what that means in this sefer. Maybe you'll tell me. You could either it's saying the ein b'neim shum mashke sheyach tamachametz.
What does it say?
Or it says the ein b'neim shum mashke tefech sheyach tamachametz. I don't know what the parentheses in the sefer are.
I think it's put them.
What?
I think it was Masupi. Was going to go back to it later, no?
Okay. Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but I wasn't sure what to do with that halacha yud gimel. I don't know what you do with the parentheses. We'll ask them the Rebbeinu. But we could have gone and talked at the Shulchan convention. We could have done something there who would have known what to say.
You did it too?
No, we could have done something there. But in halacha lamed vav, it's the clearest gedder that I saw as to.
I have a little print of that, and I can see.
Okay, you can look. This is a pretty new print.
No print is different than the old print.
What it has more modern terms and everything.
Okay, fine. Now, but in halacha lamed vav, he says something else which I thought is a very clear gedder to what it is, which he says like this. He says, if the food is, I'm going to read to you. Okay, if you put in a tiny bit of oil, it's just a little bit. You grease the pan so it shouldn't burn. It's not considered frying. Elafia. Kivan she'ein ha'isa roicheshes b'shemen or b'shuma. If you put in a tiny amount to keep it from burning, the food is not in a bubbling pot of oil, and therefore it's considered to have direct contact, which is the clearest gedder that I heard, which is when you make pancakes, you put in oil, and the oil sizzles first. The oil is hot and cooking up. And then the pancakes go into it. The pancakes are cooking in bubbling oil. Okay? When I cook something, when I put Pam onto the pot, right, the oil doesn't do anything. The oil doesn't bubble up and have anything to do with the cooking. It's mamish, just to keep it from burning. For whatever reason, it keeps it from burning. I don't know. Whatever reason, it keeps it from burning. As opposed to when I put in even a small amount of oil, to make a pancake, even a small amount of oil, that already it's a different kind of cooking because the oil is sitting there and it's bubbling, it's frying, it's roicheshes. I'm saying and then the cooking comes out differently in that kind of a food. Okay, so that's saying that what the Mishnah Berurah said, what the Mishnah Berurah said later. Mishnah Berurah said that there's a tiny amount of greasing that's considered nothing. That's considered for sure you need libun. The way the Shulchan Aruch is saying it, which is very clear, like just kind of a line what it is, that means it's mamish like Rabbi Schwartz said, you put Pam on. You just put Pam onto it, or you rub the stick of butter, such a tiny amount, just to keep it from burning. But anything more, as soon as you have oil that starts to make a difference, and starts to be bubbling and the cooking goes on differently, he's saying that kind of a thing would be ready to shaila of a machlas. Okay? Now, let's just remember what we're holding at. If it's a shaila of a machlas, for Yeridei it says you should always do libun, and Aruch it says you should l'chatzil do libun. Okay, but as far as the halach l'maisa, in a lot of these cases, people in things with more oil, which are for sure a machlas, people always tell people to do hag'alah to it. Okay, I saw a shayla brought recently.
So
what happens if you have a pan? What happens if you have a pot that you make Yerushalmi kugel? What happens if Yes. What do you do? I saw just last night or this morning. What do you do if you have a pot that you make Yerushalmi kugel in? Okay, so you use a certain amount of oil, and then comes solid things coming afterwards. What do we talked about if you do rice?
Any common house child we're gonna have, it's only gonna be a terrible.
Why is it gonna be a terrible?
That's the pleasure.
You're talking about, you mean for Pesach or for milking flesh? You mean for Pesach? For Pesach, you mean to say is for Pesach that there's the tzir of a terebola. I say it's impossible to do libun, and the Rama says if it's impossible to do libun, you could be samach on hag'alah. That's what you mean to say. You could be samach. You would say l'chatchila should do libun. That's hopeless. So I'm samach that you could do hag'alah. That's good enough. Well, my milk fleshig shilos are also hetera, but I don't usually run into treif shilos in my house.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. But the truth is, if I were to run into treif, I bought something in the store, I forgot to check the hechsher, and I cooked it in the pot. So so now we have a funny. Rabbi Schwartz is saying, and there are many who will say to people, "Oh, you cooked it in a frying pan. How much oil did you use? You used pan or you used oil? You used oil. You cooked it with oil. Fine, no problem. You use a Teflon pot or use pan, then it needs Libun. But there are many others. I think more people who would say is, even if you use a tiny bit of oil, when the Mishnah Berurah says a little bit of oil to stop the pot from burning, you still need Libun. That's what that means. The Mishnah Berurah didn't have Pam, and he didn't have Teflon pot. And when he said a little bit of oil, he meant was a little bit of oil, like a pancake. That's what the Mishnah Berurah meant.
No, but you say nobody's worried about the dinner day. They don't say it because...
Right, when they say, but if you use a lot of oil, if you say, no, I promise I made it real deeper, then it's like no one says that. And that's really what Rav Moshe is saying. Maybe Rav Moshe is just like saying, like that's not makubal to accept that. The Mechaber, it's not far-fetched to say that. He's saying on that, Machlokes Rishonim, we should be Machmer. And in Aruch he's willing to be vehicle. It's not such a far-fetched thing, but most people would say on a frying pan they would tell you to be machmir, even though you put a little oil. There's a sizable amount of people who will say like Rabbi Schwartz that no, you put a little bit of oil, that's enough. But plenty will say that you should be machmir, and you can't kasher it, right? You can't kasher it, but
in the kashering at somebody's house, certainly it's not. You need Libun. I mean,
yeah, but so
you know,
throw it out because
you certainly need Libun holidays
because
it was a guy one time I'm sure used pan for treifas.
I'm asking you a question about what would you do if you walk into the guy's house, he had a kasher house, he had a pot. You say to him, well, doesn't he ever cook rice in a pot? Doesn't he do things that are cooked in a way that are really make a real machlas? What would you say to the guy in that case? You would say to him, if it's a pot, it's a big pot.
Yeah.
What would you say to him? You say, no, don't go to that pot.
Right.
You didn't say. I didn't say in a frying pan. You say maybe he's. But why don't we say to the pot? You know, the guy sometimes cooks rice in it and cooks other things that the water's meant to reasonably dry out. Or he fried foods in it. He say to do Libun.
Fried foods in pot.
Well, why don't we say? The reason is because we're sort of, like Rav Moshe said, saying ignoring the din of your day. That's sort of what's going on. That's like Rav Moshe says. You're sort of ignoring that. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to frying pans, it's the opposite. People take the more chomritic approach, which is when the Mishnah Berurah says the little bit of oil doesn't count and you need Libun, he means even a little bit of oil. That's many people take that approach.
In somebody's house, it's called holidays. You need
for a frying pan, because maybe they do.
It's be used or has been used.
He may have done it with Pam, that kind of stuff. Yeah. You're right. So you think there's an extra reason to be machmir, but I think even if
the shiloh of somebody said I used treifas on my house a mistake one time.
I went to the store.
It's not clear.
I went to the store and I bought it.
Okay.
No, that's what happened. Okay. Anyhow, I will repeat again. Even though it's not what I'm saying to you now. The Shulchan Aruch is giving the clearest explanation to what the difference is between the little bit and the lot by saying that if the oils were a cheshes, that's the oil that's a lot of oil, so to speak, and the oil that's just there to keep it from burning, literally from burning, is a smaller amount, which is like a Pam, like a Rabbi Schwartz way of